Everything you said we already knew, more or less.
Well, here's something that you didn't know.
Here, let's get into the photo. This is one of my personal favorite photos. It was taken in Jasper, Alberta, and ironically, it wasn't like we were on some hike or some excursion. We were actually coming home from our honeymoon, Selena and I, and we had to stop in traffic because there's some construction on the road just east of Jasper, and the light streaming through the clouds and the low fog, it was just phenomenal. So I pulled out my camera and rolled down the window and took a few shots, and this is one of the ones I thought turned out really well. Obviously the light is phenomenal. That's probably one of the key things I look for in photography. I don't necessarily really like sunsets and sunrises, like some photographers only shoot that. Personally, I like to just shoot whatever the atmosphere gives you, and sometimes you get really unique images because of that. So you can see my settings on the side here, and yeah, it's been a while since I edited this photo, so let's just see where it started at and see the difference here. So let's go to camera raw defaults, and so that's where it started. You can see that's pretty bland and pretty flat, and not really what I even saw when we were there. What I saw was more of something like that, because our eyes can see a lot more detail and color than what a raw file in the camera can see. So obviously I thought it was a little dark, so I boosted the exposure up. The contrast is at 50. Usually I don't have the contrast that high, but for this photo in particular, the fog and the mist allowed me to bump that up just to get a little bit more details in the trees and the cliff on the side here. And so that really helps just bring the clarity of the entire image up. And then shadows, I brought the shadows up because I wanted to see some more details in the trees down here and the lower corner of the photo. And then whites, I just went to, I just brought up the whites until I had a little bit of a white point. So you just press option, and then at the very top corner right here, you can see that there's a little bit of peaking. I could probably boost the whites a little more, but I thought it looked good there. And then blacks, I do the same, hold option, and bring it down to a point where there's a black point. I think for this photo, my thought was I don't really want a black point because it just sort of crushes the colors a little too much, and I wanted sort of that light feel. So I avoided having a black point in there. And then where was I? Oh yeah, clarity. Clarity again was to cut through a lot of the mist and fog and add some more detail to the trees. So you can see if I take that off, it just looks a little more washed out. And vibrance, I really like the greens, and I wanted those to stand out a little bit. Same with the yellow from the backlit, or of the sun backlighting the clouds and that. And then I do a default preset just called general. And that does 50% or 55 sharpening. I know a lot of people have a lot of technical ways of sharpening, and I usually just stick around this because it usually takes care of any softness that the lens or camera might have and gets some good detail. And then obviously if it's too much, I'll go in and bring it down. But this image anyways isn't like the sharpest because of how much fog there was. Yeah, so moving on, and then here I brought down the yellows a little bit because when I brought up the vibrance to 33, it was bringing in a lot of the yellow tones, and I didn't want the picture to be that yellow. And so yeah, I brought them down just a touch, and I brought the oranges up. I don't really recall why. Let's see what that looks like without it. Yeah. You know, sometimes I don't have a reason for it. But then here I brought the yellows up to 70. That was to get a lot more brighter sky. And get rid of some of the detail in the trees here. You can sort of see a tree line. And I just wanted to have a nice clean white color. And you lose a little bit of detail along the tree line. But I don't really mind. Like, editing is super subjective. There aren't too many things that you can do wrong if you're going for a specific style. And for myself, if the photo looks good, that's what matters most. It doesn't matter if the blacks are super crushed or the whites are super blown out. What matters is if it accomplishes what you had in mind. So, and then part of that general preset I had, I might be talking a little fast, so sorry if you're not keeping up with this. I'll try to slow it down in the future videos. This is the first one. Obviously, I'm going to try to work out some of the kinks, maybe come up with a show name, and and start regularly uploading. I'm going to say that these shows are going to be maybe about a weekly thing, but at least weekly. If I ever get good enough, or if enough people start watching, maybe they'll be twice a week, 3 times a week, or even daily, depending on how long and how much time I have. So yeah, part of those general presets that I had also applies removing chromatic aberration, which is the fringing, like the blue or purple or green or purple lines you see outlining things when they're against a contrasty sky. So let's say you have a white sky and there's a tree in there. A lot of the times there's going to be chromatic aberration from the lens. And yeah, so by selecting this, you can simply get rid of it. Also, enabling profile correction just accommodates for any distortion that your lens applies to the photo. And now effects. I love using dehaze on landscapes, especially for telephoto landscapes. You can see I shot this at 189 millimeters, and I cropped it. But yeah, 189 millimeters. There's a lot of atmosphere in between myself and the subject. So I just use dehaze, and you can see how much contrast that adds. And usually my process of editing a photo, I might go into that in a later video and go into the settings a little bit. I'm not sure how long I want these. I'm just sort of experimenting right now. I probably will publish this if it turns out and my head's not totally cropped out. You can see I'm slouching a little bit because I'm not too sure about my framing, because I'm shooting on a Canon 6D and there's no articulating screen. Might have to do something about that. But yeah, anyways, so 36 on the dehaze and no vignette. I didn't want to really tamper with these corners, because this corner here is almost pure white, it's off-white, and if I was to add a vignette, let's say, you're able to see that it loses a lot of details on the cliff. The cliff looks kind of funny. Up here you get a lot more details in the trees, but I don't really want that. And then there's a little bit of, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a little bit of discoloration compared to the rest of the white there. So let's bring that back down to 0. Yeah, and so that wraps it up about in that department for all those settings there. Crop, I went with a 4x5 crop and straightened it out a little bit because there's still trees over here and still a little bit of fog, but I thought this tree right here was a really primary subject and landed right perfectly on this intersection of this top left third. Yeah, and then this tree up here too, I wanted to keep it in there. I could have brought it in a little tighter, but I like how it was sort of touching the edge of the frame. Some people say don't touch the edge of the frame with some important elements, but I don't mind. So yeah, you can see I cropped and straightened it there. I don't know if I did any removals. No, I didn't do any spot removals. Sometimes if you're shooting at a wide aperture with a wide angle lens, you'll see like lens dust or sensor dust on your sensor. And you'll definitely want to get rid of that. So you just go visualize spots, and then you'd be able to see all the white spots along in the sky. Luckily, when you're shooting at a pretty telephoto focal length, that you don't see them very much, and f8 at that focal length is not wide enough depth of field. So we're there. I didn't do any adjustments there or there. So this image is actually pretty straightforward. I did a lot of tone adjustments, and some people go into here. Honestly, I've not played into the tone curves at all. I've watched a few videos on it. It's just, again, I've done the simple slider adjustments, and that's what I'm comfortable with, and I can get the style and look that I want with those. Maybe one day I'll advance my techniques. I probably should if it's faster, but currently I know how to get the results with this. Let's go into the settings up here. So I shot at f8 just because I didn't want to lose anything that was in focus. So like these trees down in the bottom corner, they might be a little out of focus, but if I was shooting at f4, they'd probably definitely be out of focus, just because they were so much closer to our vehicle than this background tree. I focused on this tree while taking the shot to ensure that this whole cliff and the trees around it were in focus. 1/500th of a second, I wanted to boost it up that high because we were sitting in a vehicle that was running, and I was shooting at a pretty long focal length. And then ISO 100 because it was a bright morning. Yeah, that about wraps it up. I'll show you before and after one more time. Camera raw defaults, and so once again you can see the flat image, and boom, I brought up the clarity, brought up the contrast, did a bunch of other settings, and have an image that I'm pretty happy with. I don't know if I'd change anything. I did quite a few different versions of this photo. I wasn't happy with the first edits I did. It was only a few months ago, I think, that I got an edit that I was content with, because like I said before, the sky was a little discolored, and there wasn't enough detail in the trees for my preference. But yeah, so that was about it. And if you have any questions about the process or about the story behind the photo, this one's a little uninspired for the story part. Gorgeous image, but really we were just driving on the road and we saw amazing light. And sometimes that's how landscape photography works. You just get really lucky, and that's great. But also it feels super good when you're hiking in the backcountry and you see a landscape that not very many people see, and you're able to make an image that's just once in a lifetime. So maybe next week or in the next video I'll do that, and I'll go over a little bit more story behind a photo, and also let me know what genre of photography you'd be interested in seeing me going through the editing process. I have shot basically everything. I'm wanting to specialize a little bit more in landscape and nature, and pursue a career in that. There's a lot of potential there. I think it's my strongest aspect of photography, but I've also done portraits, travel photography, food photography, corporate style, all sorts. I'm not saying that I'm particularly good, but I've studied a lot of different techniques and ways of doing it. So yeah, I'd be super interested in seeing or hearing what your thoughts are of what I should record next. Thanks for listening. Comment, like, subscribe maybe. This is like first video, so I don't expect you to subscribe, but it'd be nice if I got a good boost right away. Anyways, peace.